So, beautiful parsha, as I mentioned, I have to make a confession, which is that it took me a very long time. Only later in life did I realize that it's actually a sad parsha because of the decree that the Jewish people were not allowed into Israel for that generation. But I never really experienced it as a sad parsha because the messages are so beautiful and so profound and so inspirational that I forgot that it's a sad story. So hopefully we could convey a little bit of the sadness, but mostly the inspiration and the relevance of the story. So here we go. Um, here we go. B'shalach in a nutshell, shalach. Shalach in a nutshell. Shalach means to send. Um, the name of the parsha shalach means send, and it's found in Numbers chapter 13, verse 2. Moses sends 12 spies to the land of Canaan. 40 days later, they return carrying a huge cluster of grapes, a pomegranate, and a fig to report on the lush and beautiful land. But 10 of the spies warn that the inhabitants of the land are giants and warriors, more powerful than we. Only Caleb and Joshua insist that the land can be conquered as God commanded. So terrible story, terrible lack of faith. And his 10 spies come back and say this job is impossible. And two of them come back and say, two of them say it could be done. The people weep that they'd rather return to Egypt. God decrees that Israel's entry into the land shall be delayed 40 years, during which time the entire generation will die out in the desert, meaning anyone from 20 till 60 at that age died in the desert. A group of remorseful Jews stormed the mountain on the border of the land. In other words, they realize they made a mistake. They want to repent. They want to go conquer the land. Moses says, "Don't go. God is not with you." But they insist that they go, and are routed by the Amalekites and Canaanites. So that's unsuccessful. So that's the end of the story, which is very, very quite tragic. And then you get to the second half of the last third of the parsha is a collection of laws. Some of them seem quite random to be dropped exactly in this parsha. But if you go a little bit deeper, you see that maybe these laws have to be or should be reiterated specifically after the story. So once we get to the inner meaning of the story and the inner messages of the story, then we can examine what are these mitzvot and what do they represent and how they're in some ways an antidote to the story, to the sin of the spies. So here we go. The laws of Nesachim, meal, wine, and oil offerings are given, which is very strange because all the laws of the sacrifices were specified in the third book of the Torah, the book of Leviticus. And all of a sudden here, at the end of toward the beginning of it, it's in the fourth book, and after the story of the spies, they say, oh, when you bring an offering, it's not just the offering, you're also supposed to bring a gift of grain, so wheat, flour, and wine and oil. Okay, very nice, but that seems to be should be connected to the offerings, not to this point. So we have but if you drill deeper, like I said, this commandment may be an antidote to the mistake of the spies, as well as the mitzvah to consecrate a portion of the dough, challah, to God when making bread. And then we have a story. A man violates the Shabbat by gathering sticks and is put to death. Okay, a little harsh, but that too. God instructs to place fringes, tzitzit, on the four corners of our garments, so that we should remember to fulfill the commandments, the mitzvot, the divine commandments. And that paragraph is called the portion of tzitzit is actually incorporated within the Shema. So when we say the Shema, there's a total of 3 chapters. The third one is from this week's parsha, the tzitzit, the portion of the commandments. And what's interesting is that we say it. One of the reasons why we say this chapter not only during the day but also at night, is because tzitzit does not apply at night. The mitzvah of tzitzit is a time-bound mitzvah. It doesn't apply at night. It only applies during the day. But the reason why we say it in the Shema during the day and at night is also because the final sentence of that commandment of the tzitzit is, "I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt." And we know there's a mitzvah to commemorate the exodus of Egypt every day. So we do that by saying the third paragraph. No, I'm sorry, I would take that back. There's a mitzvah to recite the Shema, to mention the Exodus twice a day, morning and night. So the way we fulfill this mitzvah at night is by mentioning the Exodus in the third paragraph of the Shema. Okay, so that's the conclusion of the parsha. Obviously, a lot to talk about and a lot to discuss. So we have to jump in at some point. Let's open it up and let's go to the beginning of the parsha, Numbers 13. Okay, if anyone has any specific questions or comments or anything to share, please do. Otherwise, we will begin with the parsha. So when you read this parsha, as we have been doing for thousands of years, but specifically in this group, we have been doing it for plenty of years as well. Thank God, in good health. So you have the big questions that everybody asks. And then there are different ways how to answer those questions. But some of the questions are so obvious and they jump out at you. And there has to be some way and you have to think about the big questions, and then you can think about the different ways of answering the big questions. I guess the first, I don't know if it's the first, a big question is how is it possible that people, spies, who were great people, the Torah refers to them as kulam anashim, they are men, they're a mensch, they're anashim, they're men. And Rashi says whenever the scripture uses the term anashim, it represents chashivut, the prominent people. They're important people. And how do we know why are they important people? Because, sometimes you send somebody on a scouting mission, but you're sending them to find information that anybody can come up with. They'll find out how long does it take to get to the city. Anyone can figure that out. But if you look at this mission, it's a little bit more complex. Moshe wants to know all kinds of things, including he wants to know, could you estimate the might of the people? That's not such an easy thing for a common person to do. You need someone with some level of expertise to understand what is the state of the people. Are they mighty? Are they not mighty? What is their power? So, of course, Moshe is going to select people who are leaders and who are talented and who are prominent. But if they were handpicked by Moshe, then how could they reach this? How could they come to this conclusion? How is it possible that 10 of them fail so dramatically and say that it's impossible for us to do it, even though God said it could? So how do they fall so quickly? I don't want to say quickly, but so dramatically. Especially that the Torah says that they were anashim, they were prominent, and they were handpicked by Moshe. So that's one big question. The next big question, I think, and this has many branches, but in other words, it opens up many discussions. But I think the next big question is, if you stop a second and you say, oh, this terrible sin, they came back. By the way, all those 10 spies were punished. They died immediately, as opposed to the rest of the Jewish people that died over many years. What did they do wrong? Moshe asked them a series of simple questions. Could you figure out, essentially there's two categories of questions. One category would be, can you tell us about the produce of the land, the fertility of the land, right? If you're going to conquer, there's one question is, how hard is it? And the other question is it worth it? So is it worth fighting for this piece of land? So Moshe has both those questions. One question is, one group of questions is, how difficult is it going to be? How mighty are the people? And the second question is, tell me about the produce of the land. Does it have trees? Is it shmeina? Is it fertile? Is it not fertile? What about the fruit? And they come back and they bring the fruit. So these are questions that Moshe asked, and they come back and they give the answer. Now the question is, that's what they were hired to do. You asked the intelligence to go and come back with an intelligence report. They came and they gave an intelligence report, and they said exactly what they saw. So how was this a terrible sin? What did they do wrong? It doesn't seem like they did anything wrong. In a way, it would be wrong to come and say different than what their eyes told them. So what was the problem? What was the sin? So that's a question. It's an important question because it's basic for the story, but it also opens up all kinds of avenues of discussions. But just to get a taste of the drama, I want to read just a few verses and see what Moshe sends and see how they come back and see the debacle. So the beginning is God tells Moshe, send men. He does. Look at verse 3. So Moses sent them from the desert of Paran by the word of the Lord. All of them were men of distinction. Torah says anashim, they were men, but men means men of distinction. They were the heads of the children of Israel, and they're listed by name. The next bunch of verses is the name. And then Moshe tells them where to go. And then 18 is the mandate. What's the mandate of the mission? You shall see what kind of land it is, and the people who inhabit it, are they strong or weak? Are they few or many? Okay, that has military benefit. How many people are the enemy? How strong are they? How many of them? How many are they? So that's 18. And then we want to know how hard is it to conquer. 19. And what of the land they inhabit? What of the land they inhabit, is it good or bad? And what of the cities in which they reside in it? Are they in camps or fortresses? Are they in cities without walls, which are easy to conquer, or are they in fortresses, which is more difficult? But Rashi also adds a twist. It's possible that if they're in fortresses, they're weaker because they have to build a fortress. If they're mighty, they live in open space. They're not afraid. So you have to think about all of this. And then verse 20, he talks about, okay, tell me about the produce of the land. What is the soil like? Is it fat or lean? Are there any trees in it or not? You shall be courageous and take from the fruit of the land. Right? Why does it take courage? Because if you're a spy and you're looking to gather intelligence and you're gathering different fruits from different regions of the land, that's incriminating evidence that you're here on a spying mission. You're not just here on vacation. So that's what Moshe says, V'hit chazaktem, be courageous, be strong, and take from the fruit of the land. It was the season when the first grapes begin to ripen, so it's the perfect time to bring back fruit. And they go and they return. And week 26, here's where the debacle happens. They went and they came to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the desert of Paran and Kadesh. They brought them back a report, as well as to the entire congregation, and they show them the fruit of the land, which is exactly what they were supposed to do. They told them and said, we came to the land of which you sent us, and it is flowing with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Amazing. And that's again, so far they're saying everything that they were told to do. Get back a report. Verse 28. However, the people who inhabit the land are mighty, and the cities are extremely huge and fortified. And there we saw even the offsprings of the giants. The Amalekites dwell in the southland, while the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountainous region. The Canaanites dwell on the coast and alongside the Jordan. Basically, they're surrounded. The land is surrounded by mighty people. You cannot get in. Later on, they come and they start telling you other things as well. They say bad things about the land. That's going to happen in 32. But so far, it doesn't seem like they did anything wrong. Caleb, who was one of the spies loyal to the land of Israel and loyal to the mission, Caleb silenced the people to hear about Moses, and he said, we can surely go up and take possession of it, for we can indeed overcome it. But the men who went up with him said, we are unable to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And then they also put out bad things about the land. They spread out an evil report about the land which they had scouted, telling the children of Israel, the land we passed through to explore it is a land that consumes its inhabitants. Rashi says, wherever we were going, there were funerals. And the Medrash and Rashi adds that God was basically creating funerals. People were dying so that the people should be occupied, the natives should be occupied in their mourning and not see the people coming to scout them, put them in danger, endanger them. So the point here is, but they looked at that same reality and they said, no, it's a terrible land. People are dying. And all the people we saw there are men of stature. Midos is size. They're great size. They're mighty or they're strong. There we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, descended from the giants. In our eyes, we seemed like grasshoppers, and so were we in their eyes. That is chapter 13. You turn the page and God is already upset, and they cried, and then they said, we want to go back to Egypt. And then God is upset, and God gives the decree that they're not going to come into the land. So now that we got some of the drama, but we're back to our original question. What exactly did the spies do wrong? Did they do anything wrong? Why were they punished? They were asked to go and collect certain information. They go and they offer that information. They should get a medal for giving a proper report. Instead, it's considered a sin, and they also were punished for the sin. And later on, we see other things that God says about them, which seemingly, we'll point that out soon, but seemingly They're just doing what they were asked to do. So that is a general question. We have all kinds of ways of thinking about it, but if anybody wants to come in and comment about this or about anything else, please do. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. Seems like Hashem wanted allowed Moses to send spies to kind of investigate how easy it is to conquer, right? And then Moses added that the spies need to bring samples of the fruit.
Right.
So
Right.
this is something that Moses kind of added. I mean, Hashem already promised that land, like something. He said that will be very beautiful. So why did he need samples of the fruits?
That's a good question. That's a very good question, and it's opening up broader questions, which is, I guess, the bigger question, which I didn't address yet, which is why send spies to begin with. In other words, here in this portion, it says God says send spies, but even in this portion, the opening statement of the parasha, Shlach lecha, send to you. What does it mean, send to you? So let's look at the Rashi. That's an important Rashi. I'm going to share the screen. Share the screen. Open Rashi's. Okay. Shlach lecha, send out for yourself men. Literally, it's send lecha. Literally, it's send to you. Here we say send out for yourself. Obviously, for yourself is a translation of, is a commentary on lecha, to you. Like also in the third portion of the Torah, it says God tells Abraham to go to the land of Israel. It's lech lecha, go to you. But he wasn't going to him. He was going away from his birthplace. But to you, Rashi there says it's for your benefit. So here too, send for yourself. So here, Rashi has a very interesting interpretation. And this comes from the Medrash Tanchuma. Says Rashi, send for yourself according to your own understanding. I am not commanding you, but if you wish, you may send. In other words, lecha means if you want to. I'm not telling you to send, I'm not telling you not to. And here Rashi borrows from the book of Deuteronomy, where we have the fuller story, where the people came to Moshe and asked, could you send spies? And then Moshe says, okay, it's a good idea, and then God confirms. So here we don't have the full story, but either way, but it's alluded to that this was not, that God is basically signaling to Moshe, I'm not telling you to do this. Do whatever you want. I mean, I know when I was a kid, whenever my mother said, do whatever you want, it was clear that's not what she wants, right? So here it's, God is saying, do whatever you want. So that leads to the questions that you raised. First of all, you didn't spell it out so much the first point, but I'm adding this. I'm fleshing it out. Why did Moshe send spies to begin with? If God is basically saying, if you want to send, you could send. But your question was also, even when God did say you should send, even when God says you should send, Moshe, God never said bring back fruit, convince them that it's a good idea. Moshe is the one who says, go bring back fruit. And we know that the fruit, maybe it made it worse. I'm not sure. It didn't directly make it worse, but maybe it did make it worse, depending how you look at the story. So why does Moshe add that? Okay, that's a very good question.
They can plant the fruit themselves after they conquer.
No, but the idea was to show them how, because Moshe is saying, tell us about the produce, tell us about the land, tell us about the fertility. So if you have a sample, I could tell you whatever I want about the fertility, but if I come back, sample a beautiful tomato, then everyone's going to want to go conquer the land of Israel. And that's in a way what happens, because when they come back and they say, it's a beautiful land, it flows with milk and honey, the zepiria, and this is the fruit. So seemingly the fruit is supporting the notion that the land is worth fighting for. But then they say, but. And you know what but means? It means everything I say in the land of Israel, Ephes is nothing. So basically, when I say but means everything I said till here is meaningless, right? If I give you a compliment, I say, you're a very great person, but you do this and that. But basically means disregard everything I said. So the point here is that they're bringing the fruit, and at least on the surface, the fruit is serving a positive. It's showing the people that the land is worth fighting for. But then they say, but it's impossible. Now, Rashi says that no, the fruit actually was part of the problem. And that will make your question stronger. Because Rashi says, they say it was beautiful fruit, but they was enormous. It was much bigger than what they were used to in Israel, in Egypt, because of the rain, I guess, or whatever it is, the blessing, I'm not sure, but it was more beautiful than they were more larger than the fruits that they were used to in Egypt. And then they say, just like it has, now you could see it's beautiful, amazing fruit, amazing produce. But then they say, just like, but everything could be spinned, right? Everything could be spun, positive or negative. They say, just like the fruit is unusual, so too the people are unusual. And that's why they keep saying they're giants, they're big, they're mighty, they're broad. And the fruit, and therefore, in a way, is telling you about the produce about the fertility and the beauty of the produce, but it's also scary because it makes it more exotic. And say the people are strange, the fruit is strange, the people are strange, and that would be a reason to dissuade the people. And that adds to your question, Vicky, which is why does Moshe tell them to bring the fruit to begin with? Go ahead, Ben. Oh, unless Vicky has a follow-up.
Well,
Oh,
I was trying
yeah,
to,
go ahead. Sorry.
yeah.
Sorry, Vicky. Yeah,
No,
sorry.
no, I was just trying to figure out if he reversed the order, and
Oh,
or
yeah,
no,
yeah.
they first, I mean, but will be after the giants, but before the fruit, but the fruit is good.
Right, right. If you
Well,
reverse the
that's
order,
what
yeah.
I mean the rules of advertisement. So you have
Everything would change. The answer is everything would change. Order
maybe.
is very important. Yeah, yeah. What's the but? If I have a compliment and I have a critique, what do I say first? If I say a compliment then a critique, then in your mind, or at least in my mind, if you give me a compliment, then you give me a critique. To me, the critique maybe undermines the compliment. If you do it the other way around, maybe not. So it's a question who you ask. Okay, but that's a very good observation, and we could talk about that because the Rebbe talks about that also about the order. That was a big, the order is significant. Okay, go ahead, Ben, please.
Yeah, so my question is they saw the fruit and for me it's and I'm like fruit. Well, yeah, I mean when if I go someplace and it has great fruit, I realize that it's been cultivated. You know, that
Right,
fruit is something that implies usually, I mean, there's wild raspberries and strawberries, but they're usually not very big, in all or in all. And so I was like, well, in listening to this, it's like, well, is this fruit that was cultivated by the giants or by the people? And so now that's part of what they'll have to take to conquer,
right.
or
That's a good point. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, what is it? How do they get this? This fruit's great, and it's like, well, it's got. I mean, the spies come back. Oh, the fruit, here it is. Moses says, "Oh, look at this great fruit." It's like, yeah, how are we going to get it? We have to get through the guards, and
right.
all. I don't know. It just
That's a good point. You must come from a region of the country, or you must have spent time in a region of the country where they grow a lot of things. But
yeah,
I would say,
yeah. I mean, that's we do that in Oregon, or we did that in
yes,
Oregon. So
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. So,
But
so that's a very good
yeah,
point. I'm a city boy.
Oregon has great peaches and has great pears and all. But if you go down to that area, I mean, it's all cultivated. It's farmers. It's people
Right.
who spend a lot of time in the land. And
Yeah.
all. So it implies a civilized culture. Civilization plus armies and all. I mean, it doesn't just
Yeah.
imply
Doesn't happen by
wild,
itself. Right.
unless there was something in the Torah. Oh yeah, it implies wild, wonderful stuff that you don't have to do anything for. Is this stuff we're going to have to work for, and how we can
Right.
get it? I don't know.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
The whole question, the fruit thing, raises a lot of questions to me.
That's great. That's great. So I'll just say I'm a city boy, so I never thought about these questions because when I hear fruit, I think about the fruit as comes from Whole Foods. But so thank you for bringing that up. What I would say is like this, that obviously fruit represents cultivation. We're not talking about wild fruit. Wild fruit are never large and never beautiful and never anything you want to write home about. So obviously it's cultivation, but to me it seems that especially before they had such advanced technology that we have today, that at least an equal component would be the fertility of the land. The soil, the nature of the soil makes all the difference. And that is something that you can replicate. Even if you're coming today with technology, maybe you could. But if you're coming to a place that's barren and the fruit and the soil is not fertile, which in Israel, if you step a few miles one way or the other, you're in desert, right? So it is important to figure out: am I investing in a place that the soil can give produce? So you're right. There's a combination. I think that, and that's why it's good and bad. I think you're right that the fruit is a combination of the potential of the soil plus the ingenuity of the people. And I think that maybe what Rashi is saying is both are true. When you look, Moshe is saying it, look how beautiful the soil is. And the spies are saying, if this is such beautiful fruit and such large fruit, it's because the people there are extraordinary. So that's your component. So in other words, you're right. I think that the fruit can do both because the fruit is the sum total of the combination of the sophistication of the society that can produce such fruit, but also a very important component is the fertility of the land, because I don't think they were able to do this anywhere. It wasn't like today where you're still obviously connected to the quality of the soil, but there are tricks where you could benefit the soil and a drip irrigation. There's all kinds of stuff you can do to grow things in different places. But I think then it was so it's basically baked into the stock of the fruit is the combination of both those components. And that has a
But you also I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, but you also referenced Egypt, and Egypt, the fertility is based upon how close you are to the Nile,
Yeah.
and all, because one side of the Nile, if you go too far away from the Nile and you go out of the flood zone where all the rich soils, come in because of the floods. So I don't know that just that little remark, it strikes me as that it's loaded with a lot of questions. So
I agree.
anyway.
I agree. I also think that the Torah keeps saying that it's a land that flows with milk and honey. And what is milk and honey? Honey, according to the commentaries, it's not honey from bees. It's a date honey. So the dates are so juicy, for the lack of the better word, that the sweet the juice spills over and becomes honey, and the milk is so rich because the goats eat the dates. So the point here is that's the picture that we're trying to, when you say land that flows with milk and honey, that's the picture they're trying to evoke. And I'm not an expert, so I'm sure we can AI this or Google this, but I know that Egypt was famous for its bread and agriculture for bread. I don't know that their fruit was so developed, right? So I think that when you want to contrast Israel with Egypt, we constantly talk about the fruit, and there's 7 types of fruit that Israel's blessed with, and only the first 2 are grain. Only wheat and barley are grain. The rest is fruit. So I suspect, without knowing anything, I suspect that the fruit is a testament to the land of Israel, specifically in contrast to Egypt, where the fertility of the Nile and the regions around the Nile were dedicated for, at least then, for specifically for produce, unless I'm mistaken. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. In other words, the main crop was grain. I'm only saying that not because I know, but because the Torah seems to constantly using fruit in contrast to Egypt. But I may be wrong about that. That we could find out. Okay, so that's some of the questions. Now we want to at least do a few minutes of answers because it's already, the clock is clicking. The clock is ticking. Okay, so I think that we could start with the second question, and we'll go back to Vicky's original question, which is why send spies to begin with and why ask for fruit to begin with. But let's start with the question. Maybe we'll come back to that, but I want to start from the second point, which is, what did the spies do wrong? And there are a lot of answers to that question. I'll start with one place, which I think is very beautiful. And it's beautiful also because it's related to the word. Moshe sends the people, and he says, Moshe sends the people, and he says, God says, send out for yourself men who will scout the land of Canaan. So we have one word for what they're supposed to do. The verb is scouts. Scout is latur, which is interesting because in English, it sounds like tator, but latur means to go and scout. Okay, it says we're sending people to scout the land. Now, I could turn to Deuteronomy. We'll turn to Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, Moshe repeats the story, and he says that the people come to them and ask, please send spies. Okay. But all of a sudden, there's a very interesting change that happens in the way Moshe says the story to the way God said it. So if you look at verse 22, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 22, and all of you approached me and said, let us send men ahead of us so that we will search out the land for us and bring us back word by which route we shall go up and which cities we shall come. The word he uses here is not scout, but search out the land. Now, in English, that's not so interesting, but in Hebrew, it's a very big deal because the word that the people used is they said, let us send men, the Yachpiru lanu. Yachpiru is a very interesting word because Yachpiru means to search. But Yachpor has multiple meanings, and that's the beauty of Hebrew. We have fewer words, but each word has multiple meanings, and therefore you get a richness that you're not going to find in at least not in English. The Yachpiru means to search, or to to search out the land. Yachpiru also comes from the word to dig, lachpor. You want to dig. In other words, don't just go and see surface, but actually dig. That's good. If you're a spy, you should dig beneath the surface. Don't believe all the propaganda that the government is telling you about the might of the land, but keep looking deeper. Okay. But here comes the key. The word lachpor also comes from the word cherpa. Cherpa is shame. So one word is search, dig, shame. What does that mean? If you combine all of those, the spy is supposed to come to the land and not find the beauty of the land. But what you're looking for is the vulnerabilities of the land. You want to come and you want to say, what is the weak parts that are being hidden that I could know about and exploit? That's what V'yachpiru lanu means. In fact, when the first time we hear about spies in the Torah is where, I think it's the first time, is when Joseph accuses his brothers of being spies. So they show up, the 10 brothers come in to buy grain, and Joseph says, you're spies. And then you know what he says? He says, you came to see the nakedness of the land. Ervata aretz batem lirot. You came to see the nakedness of the land. What do you mean you came to see the nakedness of the land? What does it mean the land has nakedness? It means that the land has the weakness that could be exploited. And that is what the classical job of a spy is, to find out the vulnerabilities of the land. And that's why that's how Joseph classifies the spies. And also, when Moshe says the story in Deuteronomy, he says, you came to me and you said, let us send spies, v'yachperu, and we can dig and find the cherpa, the shame of the land. Okay? God tells Moshe, when Moshe comes to God and says, at least according to Rashi, the traditional way, that this parsha is in response to what the request of the people. Now God comes to Moshe and he says, okay, you want to send spies, send spies. B'shlach lecha anashim, send men to you. But he doesn't say v'yachperu, let them dig and find the cherpa, the shame of the land. He says scout the land. Scout means something else. In fact, the word scout doesn't even mean v'yaturu, means scout, comes from the word v'yitaron, advantage. So now there's two different words for this. The verbs are completely different. The people say, send us spies so we could look for the shame of the land. God says, send spies to see the beauty, the advantage of the land. Now we have a beautiful interpretation. What's the problem with the spies? Why did they, what was wrong? Seemingly Moshe sent them to give a report. They came back, they gave a report. What's wrong with that? The problem is that they went as cherpa. They had no desire to conquer the land. We'll talk about that later. They had no desire to conquer the land. So they go and they look for the problems. And if you look for the problems, you're going to find the problems. Moshe says, go to the land of Israel and find the advantage. Find the yaturu, find the yitaron, find the advantage, find the good things. And if you look for the good things, you'll find the good things. So now you go back and you circle back and you say, how could you blame the spies for seeing everything in pessimistic flavor? The answer is because they're looking with a pessimistic eye. And they were not positive and they were not objective, right? There's no objective. You find what you look for. And of course, this could be applied to each person's individual life, because I come home at the end of the day and say, how was my day? I could think about how is my life. I could think about the blessings I have. And I could look at it and I could give a positive evaluation, say it's a beautiful land, it flows with milk and honey, or I could say it's a troublesome life. And the question is, what am I looking for? Am I looking for the negative, the shame, or am I looking for the advantage? And of course, we live in the physical world, so there is no perfect life and there is no perfect circumstance, and everything has positive and negative. But it's up to us to look for the aturu, look for the advantage, look for the blessing, look for the opportunity, and that's basically the shortcoming of the spies, that they did not do that. So that's one big idea of what they were looking for. Of the sin was that they were not looking in the positive sense. Now, I could say right now, even without looking at my notes, another 3 points. And I'm going to try to be brief, but I want to say those points. And then we'll take first Vicky's question, then these points, and then we'll go back. Hopefully, if we have time, we'll go back to the second question of why send them to begin with, which may be the more important question, but we got stuck with this question. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. It seems like it's a miscommunication on both Moses' part and people's part, because Moses didn't fully appreciate all the semantics of what Hashem conveyed, right? And then he added something to kind of emphasize the beauty of the land. He added it at the bottom. My question is, when they came back, was fruit mentioned at the beginning, or they probably saw the fruit first?
No, they speak about the fruit when they come back. They first go positive and then negative. So they say it's a beautiful land. It flows with milk and honey, and the proof is Zeh Piryah, this is the fruit. But they show the fruit, they display the fruit at the end of the positive, but right before they transition to the negative. So it's very clever, because now all of a sudden, like Ben mentioned, all of a sudden that fruit could be saying the positive of the land, but it could also be saying beware. Because to develop this fruit, you have to be extraordinary people, and you have to have technology, and you have to have an army to defend your land. So it goes both ways. But I would say is that maybe, just from hearing you speak, maybe it's possible that when Moshe tells them bring the land, you asked a very good question. You said, why does Moshe ask them to bring the fruit? So I can come with I can make up my own interpretation, because my point is I don't know. Moshe doesn't say. So coming up with a theory, but it's possible that the reason why Moshe says bring the land, he's trying to do what God tells him. God says send people to find the advantage. So how is Moshe to find what's good? So how is Moshe going to, what tangible instruction, let's say someone's pessimistic, what tangible instruction could you give somebody to make them more positive? So to Moshe, the tangible instruction is, look, I know Israel has a lot of problems. Sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's too cold, sometimes the hotel is not modern, but I know the fruit are beautiful. So he says, you know what? Bring me a sampling of the fruit. What is in Moshe's mind? In Moshe's mind, I'm doing exactly what God told me. God told me to help to command them to look for the advantage. But that's an attitude. You can't command an attitude. Maybe he should have. Maybe he should have got nervous that they don't have the positive attitude. But it's possible, if you want to be very, very practical about this, it's possible that when Moshe says, this is the fruit, bring me fruit, what Moshe is saying is, I need a tangible, practical application for God's vision, which is command them to go look for the positive. And I know if they see the fruit is for sure positive. Now, if you're very pessimistic, then everything is painted negatively. And that's what may have happened. But to Moshe, to me, this now makes sense. This wasn't what I intended to say, but to me, this makes a lot of sense. Because you tell your kid, go on the trip, make sure to be positive about it. Can't do that. You have to direct them and say, I know this part of the trip is amazing, so don't forget to skip this thing. Don't forget to not to take advantage of this specific thing. You don't want to miss this, because this is for sure going to be fun, right? So to me, that's what Moshe is doing. Moshe is saying, go see the land, because that's what, go see the produce, because to Moshe's mind, that's the way you show people the beauty. Now it botched up, because at the end of the day, if people are negative, they're gonna everything is going to become negative. But I think it could be that I'm actually very happy with this answer. So thank you, Vicky.
Yes, it could have been a very good selling point if they didn't.
Yeah. But I was saying, what else could you do to regulate attitude, right? Go see the positive. It doesn't mean anything. It's too general, right? But I say, go bring the fruit. And I know the fruit are beautiful. Then at least to Moshe, even if it didn't work, but I understand what he's trying to do, right? I understand what he's trying to do. If I know that in this country they're known for the wine, so I say, whatever you do, make sure you have a glass of wine, right? What I'm telling you is go do the activity that I know for sure is going to be enjoyable. Now, hopefully that would help you paint everything in the positive. Of course, there's no guarantees, and that's the breakdown. That the people are looking for the negative. So that's one interpretation. And then there are other interpretations of what the sin is. And I don't know how detailed we want to get to, but the people come and the people say, we want to, if you look at Deuteronomy, you still have to, when you read this parsha, you always have to contrast that to Deuteronomy because then you get the full picture. People show up and they say, let us send men, right? I'm going to open the screen here. I have both my finger on both. Do I have Deuteronomy here? Midbar? No, I don't have Deuteronomy. Oh, I have Deuteronomy. Okay, Devarim. What do they say? They say, we let us send men ahead of us. Okay. By this reading, the people's view, who is sending the spies, and who do the spies report to? The spies report to the people, because the people said, we want to send spies. What does God tell Moshe? God tells Moshe, that's a terrible, terrible idea. The worst thing you can do is send spies who will report back to the entire people, because the entire people, it's very easy to manipulate them. You're going to give some dangerous facts. Every war is dangerous, and if you basically give your intelligence report to the population, no one's going to move. Everyone's going to be paralyzed. You have to have people who have some level of expertise who can evaluate, is the situation scary or not? So when God now reiterates the commandment to Moshe, what does he say? According to I think it's that Barbanel, he says the main point is shlach lecha, send for yourself. What does that mean? It means forget about what the people asked. The people said, go, and we want to dispatch men, meaning they're coming back to report to the collective people. God says, Moshe, terrible plan. You dispatch men, meaning the mandate is to report back to you. Now, according to this interpretation, what is the sin? The sin is that when they come back and report to everybody. Now, technically, they're speaking to Moshe, but in the presence of everybody. Read verse 26, it's very clear, or 25. They returned from scouting the land at the end of 40 days. They went and they came to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the desert of Paran to Kadesh. Doesn't even say the children of Israel, the entire congregation. Vel kol hadat, the entire congregation. They're coming back with a report. And instead of going to the prime minister or the president in the war room and saying, listen, this is the facts that we said, how do we deal with this? They come back and they're too transparent and they speak to the entire congregation. Right? And the Torah emphasizes it again and again. They brought them back a report as well as to the entire congregation, and they showed them the fruit of the land. By Saprulay, they told him, right? So they're winking, they're allegedly in 27, they're supposedly doing what Moshe said. Oh, you asked for a report. We're going to give you the report. Yeah, but we're giving you the report in the presence of all the people. And according to some opinions, that's the sin. And I'm going to add one more interpretation before we go to the border question. And we have to stop 5 minutes early. I apologize for that. The last thing is that the problem with what they did is not that they came back with the raw facts. If they just came back and said, this is the report, this is reality as we see it, there would be nothing, maybe something wrong with that, but that wouldn't be a terrible sin. The sin was that they offered a conclusion. And later on, they say, we cannot do it. Now, that is not for the intelligence to decide. That's for the policymaker. But sometimes the person who gathers the intelligence, because they have power, because they have the intelligence, they have the information, they make policy decisions. And that, whenever that happens, is a debacle. It happened in the Yom Kippur War. It happened October 7th. Intelligence people making policy decisions is super dangerous. So that's what happens over here, right? They come back. Where am I? I have to go back to our parsha. In our parsha, we come back and they say. So they go back. So they say the story, and Kalev argues but this is 31. This is the real sin. But the men who went up to him said, we are unable to go up against the people. So they are stronger than we, for they are stronger than we. In other words, Moshe says, go and tell us what's the best way to conquer, right? If you see what he says,
Are the cities open? Are they fortified?
yeah, but he also says, no, I'm sorry. And elsewhere it says the spies came and the spies said in Deuteronomy it talks about that. In Deuteronomy, I got confused. In Deuteronomy it says they came to Moshe and they say, this is very nice. And all you approached me and said, let us send men ahead of us so that we will search out the land for us to bring back the word by which route we shall go up and to which cities we shall come. Okay, that's a legitimate claim. He's not saying should we go, which way, what's the best way? And I assume that's what Moshe conveys to the people as well. In other words, what's happening is that there's a question. The spy are supposed to be say how to do this, not should I do this. Once they go into should I do this or not, that's a problem. And this can also be applied to our service of God. So God tells us, this is your mandate. Live the life, live the moral life. Do what the Torah says. Do a mitzvah. Now I can come and say, I have to now figure out how to do it. That's true. I have to figure out how to do it. But if once you come and say, should I do it? Meaning I'm the arbitrator of what is right and wrong. That becomes a little tricky, and that becomes the sin. So that is a little bit about where they went wrong. So far, we said three things. First of all, we said they looked for the negative, and that's a very important psychological message, which is in our life, you have to look for the advantage and not look for the shame. We also said a more practical thing. Who are you reporting back to? Are you reporting back to Moshe or reporting back to the rest of the people? And that ties into the broader point, which is their mission was to go and say, collect the information of how to do it, but not whether or not you should. That's not up to them. That's up to God. That's up to Moshe. That's up to the people, but it's not the spies. Okay. We have about 3 minutes left, so I want to go back to the broader point. Why send spies to begin with? Why send spies to especially why does Moshe add on his own, saying why collect fruit? And here so to make the question stronger before we resolve the question, because what makes the question stronger is actually the key to find the answer, is that up to this point, the Jewish people did nothing without God's explicit instruction. We just read about in last week's parsha explicitly that the Jewish people would not move until the cloud went up, and the cloud went up from the temple. Then they knew it's time to travel. And how do they know when it's time to stop? When the cloud stopped. So in other words, there's always the idea of almost like direct instruction from Hashem. And all of a sudden, God tells Moshe, if you want to send, I'm not telling you to do so. That should be a red flag. If I'm Moshe, I say, forget about it. God is signaling to me that he doesn't want this. It's up to us. Why would Moshe then do it? The risk is too great because you're going without God's explicit commandments. So that's a very powerful question. There's a beautiful interpretation from the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, I think it was in 1989, but it may have been 1991, toward the end of the Rebbe's life. But the Rebbe said like this. The Rebbe said that this was the whole idea. Moshe was super excited because on one hand, you say for the first time, God says, do it if you want to, meaning you don't have a direct commandment. Meaning now, up to this point, you were directly led by God. But when you come into the land of Israel, that's a transition. You're no longer going to have the explicit direction from God, and the person is called upon to use their own judgment. And in a way, that's a beautiful thing because it means that a person partners with God in creation. A person has to use their own ingenuity to figure out what is the right thing to do. You're not always going to have God telling you exactly what to do. That's going to be in the land of Israel. We don't have explicit direction. So What God is saying, we're about to go into the land of Israel. As preparation for that, you have to cultivate that new attitude, which is use your own judgment. And it's a beautiful gift. Also, on the short term, it can have negative ramifications, which is what happened now. For 40 years, they were delayed 40 years. But it's not such a terrible idea to send spies because you see that Joshua also sent spies and those spies work well. But that's another whole story. How do you contrast that with the spies of Joshua? But the point is, to Moshe, when he hears, God is saying, I'm not telling you what to do. You do it if you want to. So you could take that as a red flag, or you could take that as an unbelievable opportunity that now the human perspective, the human being is able to use his own judgments to be able to advance his divine mission. And it's sanctioned by God. God says that's what you should do. And this is what I was going to say before to Vicky's question, which is, so why did Moshe decide to add and ask them to bring the fruit? Well, maybe that's the whole point. What we're saying is use your own judgment. So you can ask me, how come Moshe added something that God didn't tell him to do? That's the whole point here. The whole point is use your judgment and say, what's the best way to move forward? Now, sometimes there will be one step back before you move 2 steps forward, but it's worth it because the ultimate goal is not to be directed from Hashem directly. The ultimate goal is we partner with God. We take his general guidance, but we use our own perspective and our own faculties and our own mind to figure out how to do so in partnership with Hashem. And that's the opening of the new stage. That's going to begin when they cross the Jordan and go into the land of Israel. But the spies are preparation for that, and that's why God signals, do it if you want to. Now, the old model, that's a red flag. But in the new model, this is a beautiful opportunity. So that is a little bit of the parsha. We're not even, I can't even say we're touching the surface. There's so much more to say in the Kabbalistic ideas, spiritual ideas. Maybe we'll do more on Friday, God willing, in good health, but enough to get us in the mood for this, what I think is an absolutely beautiful parsha. So thank you for joining.
Thank you.